So, colleagues. Okay, yeah, it works. So can I start? I hope so. You are here, so we can start. Our next keynote will be about teachers who make sense. And it will be given by our colleague, Professor Artis Svece, who is a philosopher and publicist of the University of Latvia. His research field covers eco-criticism, I don't know what it is, social philosophy, critical thinking, human-animal studies, environmental humanities, and social philosophies. So, floor is yours.
So, hello. Just as I was introduced, you could notice that I'm not an expert in education and rather a philosopher. And well, on the other hand, I would say that I have been involved in a couple of projects that could be called somehow educational, like creating of the standard of philosophy program and nowadays in the reform of School 2030 that takes place in Latvia at the moment. And so I have a bit of experience in your field, but still I would say that I'm here rather to entertain you and look from the side than somehow contribute to research of education. And the first thing that comes to my mind is that just a week ago I submitted accreditation report about history and philosophy, a field of studies. And that was quite an experience. I don't know whether you have this kind of experience in your life, but we worked approximately a week just to put the information in the system. And when we prepared this report and I would say a new program, one of the things that of course we had to deal with was this what could be called a paradigm of skills and competence. And I noticed that many my colleagues are quite efficient in doing all that is required by this paradigm, so to speak. Not all, but I mean the minimum. They are quite efficient at defining skills, competences and knowledge that their courses, for example, have to provide. And quite often they are somehow asked to rewrite them so that they would be written correctly according to the department of academical department of Latvia University. And so they rewrite it. And somehow I have this kind of feeling of returning of certain skills that I had when I was in communist youth in 1980s, when you knew what is the right thing to say. And I noticed that many of us have this skill. And so I would say that there is, for you, maybe that's not really kind of issue, but let's say in our field of history and philosophy, this paradigm is certainly not accepted as a kind of obvious thing. And it works a bit formally. And if you look at some theoreticians as well, you can notice that there is a great skepticism about the paradigm. I would say that the choice of Konrad Paul Liesmann is maybe a bit just a coincidence. Simply, his book was recently published in Latvian, translated in Latvian, and actually Professor Zanda Rubina wrote afterward. I don't know whether she knew what the book is, what the kind of drive of the book is when she agreed to write this afterward. I would say it's a bit conservative kind of approach to education. So this book is called Education as Provocation. And so there are a couple of things that Liesman is saying, and some of them I would say are important to notice, although some of them are, I would say, quite wrong. And so his basic kind of idea is that, first of all, he wants to defend humanities. He thinks that humanities are somehow forgotten in this paradigm of competence and skills. And so he suggests that humanities can provide this challenge, this provocation, by which he means that some books, at least, that you read in the course of literature are not just for teaching some skills, but also for changing the person who is reading it. And so his doubts are related to this, well, certain interpretation, I would say, of what the education of skills and competences is. And basically, he's concerned that the education is focused nowadays on usefulness. And again, I would say that he's a bit simplifying things, but certainly one can notice this attitude among those that make decisions about education, those that study, those parents of students, employers who have certain expectations about education. And one can notice that sometimes it's really bizarre, I would say, this idea that education, including secondary education or higher education, should be teaching of some particular skills that could be immediately applied in practice. And so if a person finishes school or finishes university and is not ready just to, I don't know, start to work immediately in the first hour of his or her job, then the education is somehow useless. I remember one of our rectors told the story that some business people came to him and asked, so why does university does not prepare, I don't remember, some horse breeders or whatever. And he asked, so how many do you need? And they said 2. Yes, and then the question is, so, well, I mean, is it possible that university will now teach 2 horse breeders? Or we should think about some general skills that could be applied in many areas. So this is kind of course, radical, I would say, interpretation of usefulness. But so for Liesman, there is this doubt that the approach that is focused on competence and skills lead to this kind of thinking about education. And so another thing that he emphasizes is this, what he calls professionalization of teachers. Namely, it's the idea that teachers learn just to train competences. And so it doesn't matter whether you teach literature, mathematics, or physics. It's all about teaching these skills that could be used independently of the content. And so for him, it seems that this kind of approach to education ultimately makes the education kind of empty, vacant, and ultimately dangerous for society. And I would say that there is something that one must pay attention to, certainly in what he says, but there are, I would say, a couple of issues that he doesn't address. And so I would say that we are talking about one problem, and it's a huge problem. And it makes us question, certainly, the approach that, well, the paradigm that we have had before this paradigm of competence, that one maybe could call this paradigm of knowledge. And namely, so this problem is digital revolution and the consequences of it. And I'm afraid I have to return to this author who wrote his book on postmodern condition in 1979, but I keep returning to this book and I'm wondering about the precise kind of nature of his description of the situation that digital revolution creates in a society, in universities, and in science, one would say general. So, and one thing that he noticed, which is valid also for the question about competences, namely, he said that, well, nowadays, the information that we can have is so huge that nobody can really grasp it. So nobody can read everything that's written about 17th century British poetry. So the information is so huge that it doesn't make sense to believe that the purpose of education could be just handing down some knowledge of one generation to the next. And basically, this is this paradigm of knowledge that he says we must replace with something else. This idea that education is about somehow giving this heritage of generations to the heritage of knowledge of previous generations to the next generation. And nowadays, neither teachers nor students can know everything about any subject, basically. So they are all in similar kind of situation. It's they both have to just learn how to use this information in order to say something relevant, because saying something that is true, it doesn't really make sense anymore, in the sense that the truth in itself, knowledge in itself, is not really valuable because there is so much of it that nobody can really, you can produce it, I don't know what the metaphor could be. Yes, but so if the only aim that you have is just to produce knowledge, you can just, I don't know, combine 20 books in Internet Archive and create another book, but why would it make any sense? So instead, so he uses the word of performativity, so that all of us are in a situation where we have to think what we can do with this knowledge and how can we demonstrate that the knowledge, the information that we have is important. it's not that it should be useful in the sense that it should be applied in order to create a new telephone or whatever. Yeah, so it's useful in the sense that you have to when you create knowledge, when you use knowledge, you have to demonstrate why anybody should read this, know it, see it, and so on. So another aspect of the problem, and of course it's just one problem with this criticism of competence approach, but in this case I'm focusing on that one. Another aspect is this what I calling here this future of employment. Now, digital revolution has created, well, I mean, it's still going on, and we don't really, we are in the middle of it, and we don't really understand the consequences of it. So certainly we can just observe that there are huge changes happening at the moment in the understanding of what a work is, what a job is, what is required from a person who works, and well, this process is still going on. So, and of course, the first thing that one notices and the people have tried to describe is automatization. So, which means that if I don't know, a couple of decades ago, the concern was that I don't know, computers will I don't know, automatons will do some mechanical job instead of workers, and workers won't be necessary. Nowadays, intellectual work can be to a certain extent replaced by automatic kind of systems. And so the prediction says that so many things that we are used to doing ourselves probably will be replaced by these information systems. But there are many things that follow from that. So who is needed then? So not the person who keeps doing the same kind of thing. So you have to have people who are creative. You have to have people who can look for new connections between knowledge, like Lyotard described. Who in this Economist magazine, one of the things that emphasized, it was 2017, was that we will need hybrid jobs where where one person can combine different kind of skills and knowledge in a unique way, and somehow offer this hybrid kind of combination of skills in some market. And so let's say anybody from any state, I mean, I'm simplifying but still, let's say somebody from India can hire somebody from Latvia because somebody in Latvia has this particular combination of skills that is required for the person in India, or other way around. That's what Thomas Friedman called in 2005 this flat world, as the world is flat. That, for example, anybody can, to a certain extent, of course, it's just a vision, so to speak, yeah, that anybody almost like can compete with anybody else. For example, a teacher in Latvia can compete with a teacher in Finland. So, and so what comes with it is, again, one thing that is, in a way, at first moment, it seems very kind of trendy and nice, like this idea of branding of individual persons. And of course, in educational system, we don't, at least in Latvia, I don't think that we feel it yet. But we know that every taxi driver is valued, and some stars given or grades given. Restaurants, you can leave comments on I don't know, booking.com about the hotel, and so what follows from that ultimately, if you have this situation where there are many individuals who have these particular skills that are competing with each other in kind of open space, then they have to have almost like branding for themselves. They are always visible. Anybody can comment them. And to a certain extent, I would say that happens with teachers as well. Maybe not in the way as restaurants are valued, but it's quite possible that we are going in that way. So, which means that anybody has to have communication skills, social skills. And so, again, one of the conclusions is that nowadays many employees have to have skills that used to be skills of employers, so that those that manage themselves, who have initiative, who think about public relations and so on. If this kind of environment will develop as it seems it's going to, then it means that so we all will become kind of self-managers who are always almost like public figures, which again requires specific kind of skills, and you can't just survive with knowledge or self-creation by reading some important books. Now, does it mean that teachers will be automatized and replaced by computers? Well, of course, as you know, most likely not really. Yeah, not really. But we have to ask this question. So, in this scheme of things, where do teachers stand? How I described, and my suspicions are that we teachers are much more exposed to these changes than we believe at the moment. For example, I mentioned that I help a bit to create some teaching materials for this, I don't know how to say, new programs for School 2030. This is a reform that is, as I said, takes place at the moment in Latvian education. And one of the common things that all that are working with teachers are saying that teachers are demanding textbooks. Now, I mean, these educators come to them with different kind of suggestions about methods that they could use, some, I don't know, patterns of classes and so on. But teachers are saying, well, that's all very nice, but you know, we don't have time, we don't have energy to create all this on our own. We want books, books where that would be written. So what student has to read, what are questions about the text, what are exercises then they have to do. And so the teacher would be simply someone who supervises reading of this book. And I mean, that could be automated, that could be mechanized. If teaching is just supervision of reading some text and answering some questions, one can easily do in that in as we in Latin University call it e-studies, yes, where you put different kind of exercises. This is kind of funny book. It's Ardley Neal's book. I can't see it here. School work, and I don't know what was the third word. It's 1981, and this is kind of futuristic vision of what the world will be like in 21st century. And at first, the author says that, well, it's not that teachers will disappear, they will have to check the homework that you will do on computers. But in the second paragraph says, well, ultimately they will disappear. Maybe somebody will time after time come to your home and check how you are doing, but ultimately teachers won't be needed. Well, I doubt that it will happen, but notice that this future is not really very romantic. It's, in a way, it's very harsh kind of world. For example, it's not that everybody wants to be a public person, but if this scenario works out, then everybody will have to. Not everybody is very efficient in social skills, but well, you will have to have, and those that don't have, they will lose in this competition. Everybody is on one's own, so you can't. It's kind of permanent competition between individuals. So it's like, again, you can imagine this situation of restaurants or hotels where somebody gives some grades, and then you decide which to choose and which are not, and then somebody goes bust and some are flourishing. And imagine this kind of situation on the level of individuals. And basically, that's what this scenario is envisaging. Well, there is a word that's similar to what I said. Yeah. Just what the critics of competence approach already emphasize, that you can, if you are thinking just about the skills that are needed in order to survive in this competition, what about social responsibility? What about citizens' kind of responsibility? What about ethical decisions? So I would say that this vision at first seems quite, I would say, quite kind of attractive. Yes, just like it's like comparing university with a startup. Sometimes students are they are expecting the university to work like a startup and to be this kind of atmosphere of free kind of communication and creation, and they are, of course, if they have these kind of expectations, then of course they feel discouraged when they see that a university, for example, is not like a startup. But imagine if everything is like a startup. This is, in fact, at first it maybe looks like a kind of pleasant world, interesting and creative, but it's very unstable, very competitive, very, I would say, yeah, well, harsh. I use this word harsh. Harsh for those that are not good at let's say, communication with on social media and so on. So there are certain dangers to all that, but still, what I think these two aspects of digital revolution demonstrate that competence paradigm, I mean, it can't be avoided. It's not just a question about some trend in educational thinking or theorizing. It's not it's not just an ideology. It follows from what is happening in the world and how digital revolution has changed the environment that we live in. So, as I said, competence approach has to stay. But the question is, what kind of competence, what kind of skills we need? And I would say that a motive that I maybe didn't emphasize in my slides, but I want to emphasize is that there is always some danger in education. There's always some danger in competence approach, in competence paradigm. But the answer to this danger is not rejecting this approach, but thinking critically, I would say, and thinking about the ways how to balance these dangers and opportunities. What is a reasonable way how to implement this competent approach? So maybe you, maybe all of you know, maybe some know, but just recently, Ehlers published kind of conclusions of research done by him and his collaborators. It's called Future Skills, the Future of Learning and Higher Education. It's mostly about higher education, and basically the argument is that higher education universities have lost touch with the world and realities that's going around them, and in order to remain relevant, a radical revision of university content and approach should be carried out. And so they interviewed professionals in education and those that are working in industries that are consciously working on and thinking about the skills that are needed for the future development of economics. And so he or they came up with this list of competences. They classify them competences that are focused on kind of inner management of inner attitudes. Maybe I would say, maybe that's not correct. You must invite Ehlers himself and ask him. And then those that are focused on the aim of actions, these objects that actions are directed to, and then social competences. And they differ from some of those that I have seen before, and quite a few things seem to me very interesting. to me. And actually, before this conference, before naming the title of my presentation, I thought was what I'm interested more in: ambiguity competence or sense-making competence. Both of these seem to me very interesting and important. But so I wanted to focus on sense-making. So Ehlers names as one of these competences needed for future this competence of sense-making. So he defines it as the future skill. Profile sense-making comprises the willingness and ability to construct meaning and understanding from the rapidly changing structures of meaning within future work and life contexts to further develop existing structures of meaning or to promote the creation of new ones where they have been lost. So the basic idea is that this is a skill, and skill to well, construct or create meaning where this meaning is not obvious. And so he mentions that we don't have, or there are situations when we no longer have these lasting constellations of meaning guaranteed from outside by the organization. Yeah, so it's not that there are ready-made meanings ascribed to things that we can take for granted. So we are in this situation when we discover that there are more than one meaning that people describe to what they do, and you can't be really sure. And so there is connection between this competence of ambiguity and competence of sense-making. Yes, why we need this sense-making? Because the situation ambiguous. And so how do we deal with ambiguous situations where there is no stable kind of foundation for our actions? And so sense-making describes a process by which people classify the stream of experiences. So we have these experiences, and how can we find some order in them? What if we don't have this ready-made order? Well, of course, that's a big question, whether it's true that there is no this ready-made order. I mean, one can easily imagine a person, and this is not an imagined person, but I mean, there are many people who believe that meanings, like values, for example, are ready-made, and they are there, and there is nothing to think about. But suddenly we can discover that there is multiplicity of meanings in our society. So at least we can acknowledge, and we are in the situation when we understand that it's, even if I believe that my meanings are stable and guaranteed, it's not that there are no possibilities of imagining somebody thinking otherwise. Yes, and so first of all, what does it mean to have this skill? I just use a couple of examples, kind of lazy examples. I mean, I have used them a lot to describe in the context of visual rhetorics and semiotics, how meanings are made. Do you know what is it? What is it? What is it? Pardon me? Bagheera. Yeah. And what is it? Yeah. These are two Bagheeras. One is Soviet Bagheera and another is American Bagheera. I mean, I can imagine a Cold War kind of situation there. So why they are different? Why are they different? Can you tell me the difference? Oh, cheerful. Yeah, well, both of them are quite kind of, yeah, but on the right, the American is a bit kind of silly. Well, the difference is because one is male and another is female. I mean, in English and in Kipling, panther is he and Bagheera is he. While in Russian, or for example in Latvian, it doesn't make sense to say Bagheera he. I mean, panther is she. You can't express it. You can say panther male, something like that. So the language precludes you to call Bagheera he. So, and in Russian books and in this case cartoon, it's a lady, and certain things follow from that in the representation of this animal, and other way around in America. So how meanings are created? There is one simple way how meanings are created, by connections and differences. Yeah. So in this case, yeah. So I don't know. Soviet Bagheera is this animal is connected with certain gender, and so differentiated from another gender. And so a bear is male, panther is female. I mean, in nature it doesn't make sense, but in cartoon it makes sense. Yes, and so you make these connections and differences. And so you ultimately it's very complicated kind of network of connections and differences that create this meaning. Now the problem is well, I mean, it's not really a problem, but what we can notice in contemporary world, at least. I mean, I won't. It's not. Of course, it's not true that somehow in old days everybody thought in the same way, or whatever. But we can notice that in our society that these connections and differences are, these networks of connections and differences are made in different ways. And so we have this topical kind of subject of the Victory Monument that was just destroyed a couple of days ago. It was Soviet monument, and notice how the meaning to this monument was created by two communities in society in different ways. So for one community it's kind of symbol of occupation, and there is basically a history, a narrative of history written around it, or it's part of this narrative. And another community has another narrative that is based on this idea of liberation of Latvia from Nazi occupation. And this monument is part of this narrative. Narrative also is maybe more complicated way of connecting things. When you connect events in time, but in certain sequence, and again, you can do it in many ways, and I won't now dwell on it. But what I wanted to say. So what does it mean to have the skill of sense making? It means, of course, I'm simplifying, but the basis, I would say, is it means the skill of connecting and differentiating. Yeah, so when you want to find some sense to something, you are looking for connections and differences. And when you build this network of connections and differences, then you acquire this what one could call sense. Yeah, so can one learn or teach to make sense? In a way, yes, I would say so. For example, I could give an example of values. So, of course, there are some values that are quite, well, we are conscious of them. We kind of remember, if somebody asks you, so do you love your family? Many would say yes, and so, and they wouldn't be, I mean, to a certain extent, one would say that they are conscious of this value. But for example, sometimes I have tried this on my students. I ask them, so why did you come? Why did you come to the class? Why did you come to the conference? And then, well, they give some answer. Well, I don't know. My head of the department told me you should go, otherwise I'll fire you. Okay. Now, why it's important for you not to be fired? Yeah, so, and then you can go back and you can discover that there are some values that determine your actions, which you are not really aware of. Suddenly, not immediately, and so you can learn to look for these connections between some implicit or tacit values, tacit beliefs, and ultimately look for these implicit connections. So I would say it makes sense to have it's a skill. It's not just that I have meaning or no, oh no, I don't have meaning. Yeah, so what I don't have meaning. So what can we do? Nothing. Yeah. Well, you don't have meaning. Kind of Sartrean, Camus style existentialist attitude towards the world. Nothing you can nothing do with it. No, it's not quite so. Yes, you can ask this question. So what are these connections? So how my actions are connected with other connections. So, for example, there's also McIntyre who writes about history and narrative. And I don't know whether it's important in, probably is in educators' profession as well, but I mean, in philosophers' case, it works very well. So when you think about what you are doing, you are thinking in the context of history of, for example, of your profession, of what it means to be a philosopher. So you understand that you are part of a tradition that is 2,500 years old at least, and this kind of connection it creates these values that you haven't maybe thought before. Yes, and so it can be as a task where you can deliberately think about these connections and differences and formulate this network of connections between your actions, beliefs, and values, and so on. Another thing that one should notice is that these connections are not created on your own. Again, for many reasons. I won't now develop this thought, but including the communication with others, where the value of your actions is created, for example, by acknowledgement of others of what you are doing. Yeah, so it's when you write these networks of connections, it's not just about what's in your mind. It's also about your interconnection with people around you, with the societies that you live in. Can you now create meaning? There is no meaning, but let's create meaning. Well, to a certain extent, of course, you can. Poets do that. Of course, they quite often, they don't know what they are doing, but they just put together different words, different connections, create different connections. And sometimes you read the poem, and you say, oh, well, yeah, that's something that makes sense. Horse and moon, of course. Yes. Whether you can make a connection that makes sense between anything, probably not. Yes, it's not that you can just mechanically. So a student comes to you and says, "Well, I don't know. Today I have blue skirt, and what's the meaning of it?" And you are saying, "Well, horse." And the student says, "Oh, well, fine." Yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. But you can experiment, and you can create these new connections. But ultimately, for example, in case of skirt, I would ask, so what is the social code of the clothing that you are wearing? But notice also there is, again, danger in this sense making. Those that deceive themselves are creating meanings where that are in a way wrong and artificial. Those that I don't know, believe in conspiracy theories can easily find meaning in many things that for others seems to be dubious. And again, it's very hard to tell. It's not as easy as maybe it looks at first how to prove that there is or there is not this connection. So I would say that there is always this aspect of, again, danger of sense making, and you must think critically when you do that. So can this competence of sense making be applied to educators' profession? Well, probably. First of all, one should notice that if we believe, let's say, Lyotard, then these grand narratives that justify education and educational systems as we have it now, to some extent, have disappeared. And so there is this question, so why educators' profession makes sense? Why teachers' profession makes sense? And you can't just, for example, refer to this idea of one generation giving its knowledge to the next generation. And also there is danger in what Leisman indicates, that what is a sense of profession if you become just a technician who is teaching how to be more efficient in your job. And by the way, in one of the slides, I mentioned this idea of service, and I think this is one of the great conflicts in contemporary understanding of education, at least in Latvia. because students and parents and employers more and more think about education as service, but teachers and university teachers do not. Yes, when they come together, they don't understand each other. And of course, as you can guess from what I said, I don't want to say that it's one or another. I don't believe in this idea of a teacher with capital T, where I mean students come and bow and thank for each sentence that the teacher says to them. But it's also clear that this idea of education as service has its dangers. Like, for example, what happens with this citizen aspect of education? Is it really just about giving some skills that a person can apply to in his or her job? And so just as I said, couple of thoughts without really some final conclusion. Namely, I would say that this great educator can't think about or should not think about competences or competence education without thinking about some bigger framework of what these competences is about, what education is about, what the society I'm living is about. And so if you don't do that, then this danger of reducing competence education to some training of skills, preparing people for making people more efficient in their as kind of, I don't know, just an element in certain systems that is meant just to exploit them, this danger grows. And notice that, yes, that there is this danger. Yes, I described this vision of working employment kind of system, which at first seems to be almost like exciting, but in fact it hides basically exploitation. I mean, it's not something completely bad. I mean, if I had to choose whether to work without clear working hours and do philosophy, even at 2 o'clock in the morning, or to work 8 hours in a factory, probably I would choose the first one. Obviously, I choose the first one. Yeah, so it's this exploitation is not really, how to say, it's not that I haven't chosen it, but this idea of training people to be just efficient in the job, there is this aspect of exploitation that one must notice. And so my suggestion would be that a great educator must be not just efficient in their techniques, but they must be cautious, aware of danger, and must share this awareness of danger with those that I teach. Thank you.
All speakers get some souvenirs from University of Latvia.
Where is it? Where is this university?
Yes, strange place. We know that usually people who are working in university, they are presenting, they don't get souvenirs.
Okay.
I assume that you do not have our umbrella with logo with University of Latvia.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much. It was, so I hope you understood why we need philosopher here. Some answers on question, but now we have to proceed to next steps and some reminding notes, some important information, and then we go to coffee break again. We have left something before previous one, but there will be additions. So information, certificates, people who will present something, you will get certificates after you will present, just to avoid that you are skipping presentations. Those who just participate in conference, sometimes happens, yeah. You will get certificates tomorrow at the registration desk, but if you really wish to skip something, just ask them. Some tiny chocolate and you will get it. But no, of course, seriously, you get it tomorrow. So now I already said that you will have coffee break, but after coffee break, there are RTC meetings. RTC meetings, for those who don't know, it means that there are group meetings, like friends, under some particular topics. So you just can open again our webpage, find the topic you like, and go to that room, and maybe you will find some new friends. I don't know, maybe new challenges.